A plastic disc sits inside a keep case on an electronics aisle end cap. The packaging looks identical to every other disc on the shelf: shrink wrap, barcode sticker, spine label. But the player beneath the store's demonstration television has something unusual on its faceplate: a phone jack. A coiled cord runs from the back panel down to a wall outlet. That cord is the first clue that this disc does not work the way it appears to work. The case promises a movie. The phone line suggests something conditional. By the late 1990s, the DVD plastic case had become a small, reliable contract. A buyer pulled a disc off a big box electronics shelf, paid at the checkout counter, and took it home. The disc went into a player tray, and playback started. No activation, no account, no external system involved. That consistency made the format predictable across time. A household could buy a disc, place it on a shelf, and return to it months later, expecting it to work the same way. The shelf tag placard listed a price. The price was final. DIVX arrived inside that same shape. The disc had a label face, a case, a barcode. It sat on the same retail end cap display, but underneath the familiar packaging, the operational logic was entirely different. A DIVX disc required a DIVX-capable player, a specific piece of hardware with a built-in modem, and a front panel display that could communicate status. Before playback could begin, the player had to contact an external authorization system through a household phone line. The disc itself carried an identifier. The player carried an account number. A match between disc player account and authorization server unlocked a limited playback window, generally around 48 hours from the moment of activation. That activation workflow introduced the first dependency most buyers had never encountered in home media. A quick start sheet was included in the player box. It walked users through the account sign-up form layout and the phone line connection steps. The process required plugging a coiled phone cord into the player's rear jack and into a wall phone jack, or into a splitter adapter shared with the household telephone. In a home where the phone base sat in the kitchen and the television sat in the living room, that physical distance alone created an installation problem, and that was before accounting for the failed connections, busy signals, and dropped handshakes listed on the troubleshooting checklist in the user manual. Each new dependency compounded. The account tied billing information to the player, and that connected billing to access. A billing statement envelope would arrive with line item charges for each activation event. If a household activated a disk, watched part of it, and returned to it 3 days later, a second activation fee applied. The printed receipt from the store reflected only the initial purchase price, often lower than a standard DVD, but the total cost of access accumulated invisibly through the billing cycle. There was no shelf tag or placard that explained this accumulation. The economics of the disc were split across two different moments: the retail counter and the monthly statement. Retail staff absorbed the confusion first. A customer who returned to the store with a disc that had stopped playing expected an exchange or a refund. The returns desk had to determine whether the disc was defective or whether the playback window had simply closed. That distinction did not exist for a standard DVD. A return receipt for a failed DVD was straightforward: disc broken, replacement issued. A return receipt for an expired DIVX playback window meant explaining that the disc still functioned physically. Its access had merely lapsed. The exchange policy signed behind the counter had no category for this. Customer service scripts at the support phone number printed on the activation leaflet tried to bridge the gap, but call center agents were fielding questions about billing cycles, phone line connectivity, and playback windows simultaneously. Each support ticket stub represented a different failure in the same chain. The phone line dependency carried its own fragility. In the late 1990s, most American households operated on a single analog line. A DIVX player occupying that line during activation meant incoming calls could not connect. If someone in the household picked up the phone base during the handshake, The connection dropped and activation failed. Dial-up internet sessions competed for the same wall jack. A splitter adapter could share the line, but signal degradation introduced new error conditions. The troubleshooting checklist grew longer with each variable. None of these problems surfaced at the point of sale. They surfaced at home after the shrink wrap was off, after the receipt was in a drawer, after the buyer had committed. This is where the coordination problem sharpened. A format that depends on hardware reliability, phone line availability, billing accuracy, retail comprehension, and support infrastructure must keep all of those systems functioning in parallel. A single failure at any point, whether a modem that cannot connect, a billing dispute over a second activation charge, a returns desk that cannot process the complaint, or a phone line that drops during a peak evening hour, turns the disk from a piece of media into an unresolved service issue. The warranty card in the player box covered hardware defects. It did not cover the experience of staring at a front panel error code while a rented movie sat inert in the tray. Standard DVD carried almost none of this weight. The disc played without contacting anything. The player had no modem, no account, no billing tie-in. A store circular flyer could advertise a price, and that price represented the full cost of ownership as the buyer understood it. A computer magazine comparison chart listing DVD players needed only a few columns: disk compatibility, output resolution, remote control features. A comparison chart for DIVX capable players required additional columns for modem type, phone line requirements, activation fees, and account terms. The decision cost at the shelf expanded. Expanded decision cost at the point of purchase is one of the quietest killers of format adoption. A buyer standing in an electronics aisle, scanning two nearly identical disk cases, faced an invisible question: does this one come with conditions? Retailers faced a parallel calculation. Shelf space in a big box store is finite. Every end cap display, every lockable keeper case slot, every catalog listing page allocated to DIVX inventory was space that could hold standard DVD stock with simpler return logistics and fewer support calls. The store's own policy placard had to account for a product whose failure mode was not physical breakage, but systemic expiration. Inventory risk shifted. A disk that might generate a billing complaint cost more to stock than a disk that simply worked. By 1999, the DIVX system wound down. Players were discontinued. The authorization infrastructure that every disk depended on was scheduled for shutdown. And once that infrastructure went offline, every DIVX disk ever sold, every case still sitting on a household shelf, every disk still in a player tray, became permanently inert. The object survived. The access did not. The billing envelopes stopped arriving, but so did the ability to play. A format that had promised lower entry cost delivered, in the end, zero residual value. The shelf life of the physical disk exceeded the shelf life of the system that made it function. Streaming years later normalized the idea of permission-based access, but it did so with transparency. The contract shifted from owning a physical object to subscribing to a service, and the terms were visible from the start. No one expected a streaming session to behave like a purchased disc. The confusion DIVX created came from disguising one contract as another. Metered access inside the shell of permanent ownership. A home format becomes default when every part of the system, the disk, the player, the shelf, the receipt, the phone line, the billing cycle, the returns policy, the support script, either cooperates invisibly or is simply absent from the equation. The fewer moving parts a format asks a household to maintain, the harder it is to displace. DIVX failed because its moving parts were hidden at the point of sale and exposed at the point of failure. The disk that tried to expire did expire, and so did every system that kept it alive.